All right, everyone. Welcome to the Stoa. This session is a part of our ongoing series called The Entity Pill, where we investigate the phenomenon and possibility of disincarnate entities from a transperspectival lens, meaning we're exploring various different traditions and disciplines that have some theories and practices around these entities. And treating them using the philosophy as if their ontological status is real, and to see what kind of alchemic magic that affords. And today we're speaking with Patrick McNamara, an experimental neuroscientist with over 15 years of research experiments focusing on the nature and function of dreaming. He has published extensively on how dreams relate to the self and is currently serving as a professor of psychology at North Central University, while also holding a position as associate professor of neurology at Boston University School of Medicine. And today's topic is going to be entity encounters in dreams, both good ones and bad ones. And how today is going to work, I'm going to take in Patrick in a moment. He's going to share some slides, and then I'll ask some questions, and then we'll engage in Q&A. So if you have questions, anytime, pop in the chat. I'll call on you. You can ask your question to Patrick. So that being said, Patrick, welcome to the Stoa. I'm going to take you in. Oh, you're on mute. And I'm going to make you co-host right now, so you have slide share access. Oh, yeah, there you go.
There we go. Hi, everybody. Thanks for inviting me. I love this topic. I think it's a central issue, the ontological status of these entity encounters and dreams on psychedelics, UFO-related phenomena. So I think dreams is a particularly potent way to look at this because we know something about the science of dreams and the neurobiology of dreams. So it gives us, at least a starting place to look at if you're interested in brain mechanisms that allow us to have these entity encounters. And dreams is a good place to start. So let me share my screen. Hope you can all see this. So I'm
Would you like to enlarge it, Patrick? Share, or that
that any better?
full screen, because we see the
Let's see.
yes, there we go.
There we go. So I'm particularly interested in religious and spiritual entities. Obviously, throughout human history and across human cultures, most non-human intelligent entities have been deemed spiritual entities or religious entities. And throughout human history, most of human cultures, traditional societies have said, well, we encounter these gods and goddesses and these spirit entities in our dreams. And so that's a good place to start looking for them. Here, I just lay out some of the previous psychologists who have looked at this issue. There's obviously dozens of them. I'm not the only one, and then there's generations of anthropologists and ethnographers who have looked at this issue. I just list some of the references here. This stele here, this plaque here is from the Mediterranean world, Greco-Roman world. This is of the Greek god Asclepius. There were temples to Asclepius throughout the Mediterranean world for over 1,000 years. And people would go to temples dedicated to this god in order to incubate a dream and to encounter that god or one of his helpers. One of his helpers might be his daughter Hygeia here. And if you encountered the god in one of these incubated dreams in one of these temples, and he laid his hands on you, then you would be cured. And there are testimonials, written transcriptions, stele, all kinds of evidences that these cures really did happen, at least from the point of view of the dreamers. So these individuals here are probably family members or maybe priests of the temple. And this whole area here is called the Abaton and these temples. So um, throughout the Mediterranean world for thousands of years, people sought encounters with this entity, this god, Asclepius, and they had cures. And encountering gods in dreams are in all the world's religious traditions. This is Vishnu dreaming the entire world into being. The famous Jacob's Ladder dream in the Bible. This is William Blake's depiction of that. So the story here is Jacob was traveling along and he got tired. He laid down. He had a dream. In the dream, there was this thing in the sky, this heavenly realm, and out of this thing came this stairwell, and these spirit beings came down. He called them messengers, angels, and this all occurred in his dream. So even in the Bible, we have testimonials that you encounter beings via dreams. Same with the tradition of Islam. This is depiction of Mohammed's famous night journey to Jerusalem, which universally is considered occurred in a dream. So dreams are considered sacred in that tradition, or at least in one strand of that tradition. The famous dream of Zhangzhou in the Chinese tradition. Am I dreaming? He dreamt that he was a butterfly, and then he asked later, am I the butterfly dreaming I'm a spirit being or a human being? So to get into some of the neurobiology behind dreams, there are four types of sleep. There's famous rapid eye movement sleep, where we have our most vivid dreams. These are sort of the narrative type dreams, narratively structured, long dreams. But then we have N1 stage sleep, where we transition into sleep from waking consciousness. We spend most of our sleep in this non-REM stage 2, this is known as light sleep. But the most important form of sleep, from the point of view of most sleep medicine specialists, is slow wave sleep, N3 sleep. And that's the deepest form of sleep. Um, I'll just skip the brainwave activity to show you this. So the important thing in this slide here is just to show you that the first night this is a single night of sleep. This is what each of us go through each night. So from wake, we transition down. We have a brief entry into REM. Then we spend a lot of time in stage 2, and then go from there deep into slow wave sleep. We arouse a bit into a short REM period, then go way back down deep into slow wave. Then we arouse again for a little bit of REM, but then go back for some more slow wave sleep. But then in the second half of the night, we spend most of the night in REM sleep. We still get some stage 2 sleep in the second half of the night, but mostly it's composed of REM. So during the first half of sleep, you get the spindling activity, and you get a lot of slow waves. But the brain is in very deep sleep. There's not a lot of brain activation going on. But in the second half of sleep, you get these theta waves that are emanating from the hippocampus and the amygdala deep in the brain. And when they occur in animals, animals are open to picking up thanus impulses and reward-related activity and threats in the environment, stuff like that. Same in humans. So we spend a lot of time in REM sleep and theta activity. Um, so some of the neurobiology associated with REM that's important for entity encounters is, as I was saying, this theta activity. And it begins in these limbic regions, and then it spreads to all other parts of what we call the paralimbic areas of the brain. And those areas contain what is known as threat detection circuits. So when they're activated, the brain is on sort of high alert and it's looking out for things that could be internal threats or external threats. And then these theta waves start to recruit these things called PGO waves, which are electrical spikes in the electrical areas of the brain. So the visual areas of the brain is starting to light up. And then you get these rapid eye movements. And then you get a lot of crosstalk between these paralimbic areas. This area here, the temporal parietal occipital junction, is particularly important for entity encounters. If you electrically stimulate that area in human beings, they get out-of-body experiences, they get and they get entity encounters, and they get something called ecstatic seizures sometimes. This is where the individual has intense seizures, and they encounter spirit beings. So that area is intensely activated during REM sleep. Also associated with REM, you get atonia of the anti-gravity muscles. So we're paralyzed, can't move, yet all the sexual organs are activated. Then you get these autonomic nervous system storms, and you get suspension of the thermal reflexes during REM, which is also odd. So REM neurobiology is this paradoxical phenomena where you get an intensely activated brain state and intensely activated sexual systems, ANS system storms, and a suspension of thermal regulation. And then you get these things we call dreams. If you neuroimage the brain while somebody's dreaming, these are the areas that light up and the areas that get turned off, basically. They're downregulated. So the areas that light up are the ones I was just saying, the parahippocampus, the amygdala, temporal occipital junction, and some of the visual areas. We're looking underneath the brain here. We're looking inside the brain here, and we're looking at a lateral view, a side view of the brain here. So the greenish areas, these are the frontal lobes here, parietal lobes here, and they're interconnected, and they generally subserve what are known as executive functions, analytic reasoning. These things are downregulated in REM, typically, whereas these paralimbic systems in the temporal occipital junction are upregulated during REM. I'll skip that slide. So obviously, we get these things we call dreams during REM. Dreams occur throughout the entire sleep cycle, but they're particularly intense during REM. And this slide, the only thing I want to point out here is in ordinary dreams, when you analyze the content of thousands and thousands of dreams, they're composed. Half of the characters that occur in dreams are composed of familiar characters, people we know. The other 50% are composed of strangers, people we don't know, beings we do not know. When you ask people about their dreams, they say, "Yeah, and they're in the background. There were these other characters. I think they were like men, but I'm not sure. They were vaguely threatening. They're strangers. I don't know who they were, but they were there." And then when you analyze longitudinal series of dreams, you see, and sometimes when you analyze dreams across a single night, you see that these strangers in dreams morph into supernatural characters. When dreams become nightmares, they morph into monstrous, scary characters. And when dreams when these characters morph into other characters, they're invested with supernatural powers. So we think we have data that entity encounters, supernatural entities, start off as these strangers in the dream, and then they become more prominent, and then they get invested with supernormal powers. The key event that leads to that series of events, we think, when we do detailed cognitive analyses of these dreams, the first thing that occurs is there's a reduction in dreamer agency. So the dreamer suddenly feels like they don't have a lot of agency. The power goes out of them. And when their agency gets reduced, it gets invested into one of these strangers, and then the strangers get supernormal forms of agency. Um, a hypothesis we're entertaining about how a lot of this occurs is we're calling the REM intrusion hypothesis. So you see elements of REM neurobiology and theta activity intruding into waking consciousness. And when that occurs, you get um, high scores in creativity measures, get daydreaming. It occurs in selected neuropsychiatric disorders and selected sleep disorders. And we know that it occurs during psychedelic experience. Very quickly, the psychedelic experience is mediated by what we call 5-HT2A receptor signaling systems. And when these serotonergic signaling systems are activated, you get the full-scale psychedelic experience. And when you block those receptors, you take away the psychedelic experience. Well, those same receptor signaling systems regulate REM sleep. So the same neurobiology is involved in both. Some of the neurological disorders that we have studied where you get entity encounters or some forms of temporal lobe epilepsy, you get them in near-death experiences, and we know that a good piece of the phenomenology associated with near-death experiences exhibits signs of REM intrusion. And you get REM intrusion phenomena and certain forms of schizophrenia. It's very prominent in most forms of narcolepsy, isolated sleep paralysis, and of course, nightmares. Um, about 5% of the population has recurrent nightmares where you get these entity encounters. Um, Nightmares is a REM phenomena. You know, most nightmares occur in REM sleep, and you get very high REM density measures when you get nightmares. And when you get entity encounter in a nightmare, you get very high levels of distress associated with that nightmare. Um, this is sort of hard to see here, but so all I'm laying out here is you get, so entity encounters occur in nightmares, sleep paralysis. Sleep paralysis is where the individual awakens, but they're still in REM sleep. So their consciousness is awake, but they're still undergoing REM atonia. So their muscles are paralyzed. They can't move. And often they experience an intruder in the room with them, an entity in the room with them. Another disorder like that is called REM sleep behavior disorder, where dreams, where the atonia is lost associated with REM. So they're, instead of normally being paralyzed in the REM state, the cells associated with that are lost, so they start to act out the dreams. And the dreams are, they're almost invariably, they're fighting an entity. You wake them up and they say, there was a spirit being here. He was attacking me and my family, so I was trying to fight them off. And in narcolepsy, you get a lot of these threatening supernatural agents. So we're studying those neurological disorders in detail, and you know, because they're great examples of entity encounters. And this is very quickly just to show you, and I apologize for running so quickly through all of this, but I was told to not spend too much time on the slides. So some hypothesis about when these nightmare contents occur associated with dream entities, or it has to do with when we're transitioning between brain states. Another hypothesis, well, they're associated with disorders of arousal. when we start to arouse out of deep sleep, we get the entity encounters and nightmare content. And another is our hypothesis, the REM intrusion stuff. And this shows you that these disorders I just mentioned to you, where you get intense entity encounters, REM sleep behavior disorder, sleep paralysis, and nightmares, they're all occurring in these REM states. They're not occurring at the transitional states or in the arousal sections of the sleep cycle. And just a quick few words on other types of dreams where we get big entity encounters. In the dream science community, some of them are known as big dreams. Carl Jung called them big dreams. And these are epic dreams. They're generally positive in tone. The individual meets a god or goddess, and the god or goddess bestows gifts on the person, and they're transformative dreams. Same with spiritual dreams. Lucid dreams are a really interesting case. We're collaborating with a group that are now looking at case where you wake up in a dream and you have an entity encounter and you can dialogue with the entity. You can say, "Hey, are you real?" Or "What's up with you? Like, what do you want?" And what are they going to say? And the interesting thing about lucid dreams, they seem to be from a brain point of view, a hybrid state. So like I just related to you earlier, the frontal lobes are generally down-regulated in REM, but in lucid dreams, the frontal lobes are not as down-regulated. So there's some frontal activation, and thus the awareness that they're dreaming. This is a really important type of dream, the visitation dreams or entity encounters. And it's almost tragic, but they're not being investigated scientifically. So there's been a few surveys of these, but I think these are particularly important for understanding the ontological status of these entities. A visitation dream is if you love somebody and they die. Often what occurs is a few weeks later, they appear to you in a dream, and they're generally in a more healthy state than when they died, and they give you a message saying, "Look, I'm all right, don't worry about me." And the person wakes up from the visitation dream, they say, "That I had a real encounter with that being. They're now in a spiritual state, but they were my loved one. It was real. This is not just a dream. I know it occurred in a dream, but they're absolutely real. I'm utterly convinced of it. I now know that there's a spiritual realm and spirit beings, and again, we know very little about these dreams except these kinds of testimonials. I think they're a gold mine for understanding entity encounters. Shared dreams are interesting. They're relatively rare, but they do occur. We have pretty good examples of them. They generally occur between like mother, child, or between two people who are deeply in love. But the most clear accounts occur among twins, and they're dreams that they're literally the same, and sometimes down to tiny details. But what's interesting is that there's always like a spirit being in the background, when in these reports anyway. Again, these are under investigated. You can imagine how difficult they're investigated. They're relatively rare and so on. So, but I believe they're real, and I believe I mean, once we start investigating what they'll tell us about how brains work in general would just be amazing. How can two brains have the same dream? Um, I'll skip false awakenings, sleep paralysis dreams. I think almost all of us have had one of these things where you wake up, you're still paralyzed, but you're in a dream state. We know they're in REM sleep. And as I was saying earlier, often there's a feeling of an intruder in the room. When there's succubi dreams, it's usually the intruder sits on the chest of the victim, And we think that's because the part of the muscles associated with the lungs are still partially paralyzed, blah, blah, blah. We really don't know. But the basic explanation that most scientists think is going on here is that um, the brain has to come up with an explanation for why it's conscious but paralyzed. So, and you're in the REM state, so all the threat detection circuits are being activated. So you're conscious, you're paralyzed, the threat detection is being activated. So the brain comes up with an explanation. There must be an intruder in the room. But there's lots of problems with that. So my group's hypothesis is that REM intrusion in general and is associated with us rising in the REM state from deep slow wave sleep. So we're in theta, and when something called theta gamma coupling occurs, when those paralimbic regions are coupling with some portions of the frontal lobe, then you're much more likely to get entity encounters. And we're studying this currently in a longitudinal study with about 150 participants. They wear these dream headbands where we can record their brain activity across 2 weeks of collecting dreams. And hopefully we'll get able to get more data on this. We're putting together a computational simulation of these dynamics. And this is just a plug for a recent book of mine where I go into more detail about all this stuff. So that's it. Thank you. I'll stop
Awesome.
sharing.
Let's give Patrick a
I,
round of applause.
one last thing. Again, I'm sorry for going through all of that material so quickly, but I know we got a short period of time.
Yeah, no worries. We got some quick minds in the room, so it was good setting up some of the questions I have and I imagine people have. Um, so I guess the first one is with these entities or supernatural agents, and this might be a little bit out of the realm of uh, what you study and research, but their ontological status. What is your theory on that? And maybe do you have a taxonomy of the different theories available for what these things are?
Uh, I think the default hypothesis among scientists obviously is that that they're post hoc explanations that the brain dreams up in order to explain anomalous phenomena associated with REM intrusion activity. But I think when you get things like those visitation dreams and where people say, no, 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 you know, they were absolutely real. I think that's better evidence that they have this independent ontological status. And when you look at entities, these supernatural characters in dreams themselves, they move independent of the will of the dreamer. They have their own intentions, their own mental states. Um, uh, and when we can ascribe levels of agency like that to minds, then we generally ascribe ontological status to them. Like we do so with groups, for example. We can hold corporations and other groups accountable for their actions because they have a form of intentional states, agency. And I think the same with these spiritual entities. So I'm open to the view that they're real in some sense.
And regarding the demonic dreams, because this series, even though it's looking at entities as like a catch-all category for malicious and non-malicious, but we're focusing on the malicious ones sort of as a spiritual or psychological martial art of self-defense. And I'm someone that has recurrent isolated sleep paralysis. I had it since I was young. And the most recent one I had, I mean, people here are aware of it if they read the newsletter. It was at the cottage last month. I was sleeping, and then there was this entity choking me, and then like I feel like there's spiritual progress emerging because I don't get afraid anymore. I just sort of like I just fill my chest with love and then kind of wrestle it away. But this one was interesting because my wife, who was awake at the time, while I was having that occurrence, she had that demonic voice in her head that just said hello. And so that was like the first time
Hmm.
something like that happened. So that might have been like some kind of shared dream. And I had a few other occurrences a few days after. And so yeah, I'm curious if you have any comment on that kind of shared aspect because I've heard that from other couples as well, that happening. And what comes to mind is that this clip on YouTube of you describing kind of the demonic entity getting closer and closer into sleep
Yeah,
paralysis, and
yeah.
then like actual possession. So maybe you can talk about how like the sleep paralysis could lead to actual demonic possession in waking life.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure which interview you're talking about, but yeah, there, I've also written on spirit possession phenomena, and when you review the spirit possession phenomena, um, the published cases, where they've been investigated by psychiatrists or anthropologists and so on, invariably they're associated like before the possession occurred, they were encountering these entities in dreams, and then they had a nightmare the night before the actual possession occurred. And then when you review, and I've published this in previous books and papers, when you review long series of nightmares, that's the phenomenology you see associated with it. So first, there's just an intruder in the room, and they're a vaguely threatening um, presence, like, and the dreamer pays no attention. And then the intruder becomes a bit more defined, and they're physically closer to the dreamer. And again, the dreamer pays no attention, because this happens all the time in dreams. Strangers, like I told you, strangers are ubiquitous in dream content. However, if you follow the series more, and the dreams become more disturbing and filled with more nightmarish content, then the same intruder, they're known as the same intruder, gets closer to the dreamer, and uh, the dreamer's now aware that this intruder intends the dreamer harm. And then a few weeks later, the intruder is now known to the dreamer, so they can define the features, like the face and who they are, this kind of stuff. And then the intruder's intention is made known. They want to possess, psychically possess the dreamer. And the dreamer typically fights that off, like they're we have accounts of them like just somehow fighting it off mentally, um, or trying to wake themselves up or something like that. Um, but yeah, in the spirit possession literature, you see, well, sometimes the possession actually happens, and then you get all kinds of interesting phenomena in waking consciousness after that possession.
Mhm. And then the last question I'll have is like practices, proactive practices or defensive practices. So in the series, we're inviting a lot of speakers and authors. We just had Lama um, Telstra come in talking about feeding your demons practice, Buddhistic, Tibetan Buddhistic practice. Bob Faulkner, who's an IFS therapist, who's here today. This book, Others Within Us. They have kind of practices in IFS to deal with spirit possession or what they call uncontacted burdens. Um, and uh, and so I'm curious what kind of practices, whether proactive or defensive, could be done with spirit possession in these entities.
Um, well, there's all kinds of treatments for nightmares that are pretty effective. Not all kinds, but there's imagery rehearsal therapy that there's been placebo-controlled trials on that. That's apparently effective. There's some medications that it's like taking a sledgehammer, it shuts down your dream life completely. In cases of emergency, that's appropriate, it seems to me. Um, in the ancient Mediterranean world, people actually wore these necklaces, these talismans that protected you against nightmares. They were blessed by priests and so on, priestesses. Um, there are all kinds of, in every spiritual tradition, there's all kinds of spiritual disciplines that protects you against this kind of stuff. You know, you need to go into your own tradition and find those resources, but they exist. They're explicitly developed to protect against evil influences, and I think they work. So yeah, there's medical approaches, psychological approaches, and spiritual approaches protect you against that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I find when I pray before I go to sleep, I tend not to have a sleep paralysis
There you
encounter.
go.
Um, Bob, I'm going to tag you in. You had a question.
Thank you. Wonderful presentation, Patrick. Thank you.
Thanks,
Really
Bob.
packed. Two questions. If you were working with dreams to induce positive entity encounters, what would you do?
Mm. There are studies on dream incubation, and we have the testimonials from those healing dream incubation sites from the Greco-Roman world. And generally, what you do is just good sleep hygiene and engage in good spiritual practices like a regular meditation life, regular prayer life if you're religious, spiritual. Um, um, Regular social, apparently social interactions are a way to protect against this stuff as well, in a way to incubate good dreams. Dreams are implicated in attachment dynamics, so um, being around people that you like being around and you want to attach to. But that's what they did in the ancient world at these temple sites. Those are the kinds of, sometimes they would fast, but it was prayer, fasting, being around other spiritual people. And that's what incubated a dream where you'd have a wonderful entity encounter that was healing psychically and physically.
Great.
So I think I'd recommend those kinds of things. I think we need a revival of wide-scale dream incubation centers that specifically focus on this kind of stuff, how to incubate positive dreams. They
Great.
should be at these health spas and health retreats and holistic healing centers.
Yeah. I have two more questions if I can squeeze them in. Is anybody doing this? Is anybody pioneering this kind of modern dream incubation movement? And the other one is, could you please give us, you said you've done some writing on spirit possession. Could you let us know how to find that?
Yeah. My book on spiritual possession, I think you can get it at Amazon, I'm pretty sure. Um, I, I I'm aware of, so there's an association called International Association for the Study of Dreams, which you guys probably know about. Um, and I think there are several groups within that association who are actively working on dream incubation projects, including, much more widespread, and getting angel investors to create these kinds of clinics. So I'm pretty sure it's being done, and I don't know who's doing it specifically, but I think you could find out who's doing it through that association, International Association for the Study of Dreams, which is a great scientific association, recommend it to everybody.
What's the title of your book on spirit possession?
I think it's called that. I think it's called The Spirit Possession, and it's 2 volumes. One's a
Great.
bunch, one volume is a bunch of case reports, and the other volume is a review of the literature from antiquity to the present. A big slice of the literature on spirit possession comes from what's known as the divine kings. So all throughout the world, uh, royalty underwent these sort of spirit possession rituals. So a lot of the testimonials we have about that comes from that literature, the sort of literature on the divine kings and queens.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So thanks, Bob. And then Patrick's books and the links in the chat. Yeah, Kevin put it there. We'll go with Topher and then maybe Guy after.
Thanks, Peter. Patrick, it's very interesting to hear about your work. I've been dream journaling for about 2 decades, so this is all like very interesting. So my question around practices to cultivate more friendly dreams is related to sleep position specifically, because I have noticed in my experience that if I am personally lying on my back, the likelihood of having a nightmare or a more infrequent sleep paralysis experience is more likely to happen. Whereas if I'm on my side, my belly, or some other variation, that is much less likely. I'm curious if you've come across anything in relation to sleep position and what that might induce or not.
I don't think there's been a lot of work on that, but I know there has been some work on it because I know that that phenomenon is real. I think that, you know, I've come across that particularly in sleep medicine clinics where I've done some work. So, and I know, and I've came across papers on that 10 or 15 years ago, but I don't recollect who it was done by, but I know the phenomenon is real. And if I remember correctly, the authors were theorizing like why on earth would that be the case? And their speculations involved the placement of bodily organs on the left or right. And if you know, for left-handers, and this is a whole other literature on handedness and dream stuff. But if you're left-handed, then you're particularly vulnerable to unusual dream phenomena when you're on your back for some reason. But I don't recall very much about those studies at all. There have not been many of them, but I know the phenomenon is real, and it's been investigated at least a handful of times. I wish somebody else would investigate it more. There's a massive literature on sudden infant death syndrome as a function of whether or not they're lying on their back or on their sides. So that's a link there as well.
Any follow-up question to share, Topher?
For what it's worth, I'm right-handed, despite that. No, thank you. Thanks for expanding on that. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Awesome. Skylar and Khalil had some good questions, so I'll take in Sky.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Patrick. I was originally interested in hearing you on the shadowy figures and the sleep paralysis. That was something that happened to me from like 16 to 19. And I've heard, yeah, it was quite a lengthy, it was like every night at times, and there was some communication that I had with them. Over the years, I've had different theories that it was like, demons, dark, entities, and or UFOs, like extraterrestrials was a theory at one point. I never really found an answer. I'm also willing to accept that it was, you know, some kind of something happening in the brain. And I like what you're offering around the threat, the system, you know, sort of needing to perceive or understand a threat in the space. So I'm sitting with that. But the question that I put into the chat was about the shared dreams. I have that quite frequently, actually. And I think, you know, and I also put into the chat something about the Tibetan dream yoga, which is something that
Yes.
I've practiced. And as you know, maybe it's clear, like I have a very, very vivid dream life, and it's a big part of where I get my healing and my
Good.
prophecy. And I'm very connected to these ancient traditions that you talk about. Um, but like these shared dreams are so fascinating when they happen. They
Mm.
seem so significant. And a friend of mine was once like trying to create a log, like if we could only, you know, like if we knew what each other were dreaming regularly, like could we
Yeah.
predict phenomenon? Could we, you know, predict climate catastrophes? Could we,
Yeah.
because ancient cultures did that, right? The elders were
Yes.
analyzing the dreams of the tribe in the morning, and they predicted the arrival of invaders or threats. And
That's right.
it like pains me that we're not
Me
more.
too.
Okay, cool. Well, if
Me
anything
too.
I've said has sparked something for you, I would love to hear you talk about it.
Well, thanks for that. First of all, I hope I'm not coming across as saying, you know, like the intruder phenomena and the dreams we have associated with sleep paralysis and other states like that is nothing but brain misfirings. I'm not at all saying that. And I am saying that maybe a portion of them are, you know, maybe a slice are, you know, like there are some dreams associated with sleep paralysis and nightmares and other phenomena where it is the brain, that threat detection circuits being activated, and the brain is coming up with the best possible explanation. Oh, an intruder. You know, there's some dreams that we can ascribe to that. Fine, good. There's some, you know, some are hallucinations, fine. But they're the vast majority, the rest of them, we don't have good explanations. You know, like there's no way the threat detection circuit can come up with things like the visitation dreams, you know, or dreams where the god or goddess confers benefits and blessings on the end. So we don't have a good explanation for all the rest. And we certainly have no explanation for shared dreams. And yet, as you point out, they exist, you know, and if we studied them, the potential there would be immense. Not only for, you know, like the stuff you mentioned, like um, um, enhancing the relationship between the two dreamers or figuring out stuff that we couldn't figure out alone when, you know, dreaming alone. But also, like, what does that say about the brain if, you know, if two brains can have the exact same mental content? None of our theories of the brain can account for that currently. At least I don't know of any. So, you know, the investigation of shared dreams has the potential to sort of revolutionize neuroscience, but they're not being investigated. Um, I'm not sure if I addressed your concerns at all there.
Absolutely. It wasn't even a very clear question, so you did address it well. I think it was like the expressing of the enthusiasm and like I guess just as someone for whom these are very, very real, very valuable gifts of this life. Yeah, I really appreciate what you're doing. Thank you.
No, thank you.
And Patrick, do you have a hard stop at the top, or could we go 10, 15 minutes?
I can go a little bit longer, yeah.
Cool. Khalil, you had a question.
Oh, hey Patrick, thanks for coming today.
Hi.
You have to forgive me. Today is my first day encountering you and your work, so
Oh, that's
forgive me.
fine.
Forgive me if this question is a little confusing. So, first of all, I'm interested in what drew you to this topic because I'm sure there's an interesting story there. And Just to add the second question onto that, I heard you talking about this idea of personhood on the Hermetics podcast. And I
Oh,
wanted
yeah.
to know if, well, to where I understand it is that, first of all, I'm a person because someone treated me as a person, you know, as a baby, as a kid. And without that interaction, I wouldn't realize my personhood. So I was wondering if that's related to how you understand these entity encounters, your notion of personhood and its role in our realm, if you will. Anyway,
Yeah.
that's all that. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that question, because on that podcast, I was interviewed by about another book of mine, which was sort of in the realm of philosophy. It was on the philosophy known as personalism. And that philosophy, as I understand it, and as I've developed it, says, well, a lot of people say, well, the basic stuff of the universe is matter, material stuff. And science is sort of debunking that. Philosophy is sort of debunking that these days. And our very subjective experience is debunking that. So then what's emerging as an alternative to that is, well, consciousness is fundamental to the universe. But what the philosophy of personalism says is, yeah, well, consciousness, yeah, but personal consciousness is fundamental. And that's very different from saying mere awareness is fundamental. What's fundamental to the universe, to reality, is a personal consciousness. And the way that I connect it to the whole realm of entity encounters is the philosophy of personalism says the universe is saturated with personal beings, and they're real. Some we see, some we don't see. But that's the basic claim of the philosophy of personalism. That's what that book was about. In terms of how I got into study sleep and dreams, I'm not so sure it's such a interesting story, but it's basically I was just grabbed by the scientific mystery, like I was laying out for you all earlier. REM neurobiology is really strange, and we have no scientific explanation for it. Why would Mother Nature, every 90 minutes while we're asleep, activate our brains more intensely than it does during waking consciousness, paralyze us, sexually activate us, and force us to watch these things we call dreams? Why would Mother Nature do that? What possible function could it serve? So, I was grabbed by that scientifically, and then I went down the rabbit hole on sleep and dreams. I still don't have an answer for that question, by the way, nor does anybody else.
Any follow-up question or share, Khalil?
No, no. Thank you for that answer. Yeah, I'm looking forward to digging more into your work. I'll leave it
Thank
for
you very
someone
much
else.
for the question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, let's go to Guy. He had a question, and we'll go to John.
I think Patrick more or less answered my first question, but I've got another one. What do you think might be the evolutionary benefit of seeing these supernatural characters in dreams, if any?
Oh, thanks for that question. I don't think I can answer it. Evolutionary benefit. Well, the current evolutionary theory I'm entertaining for REM itself. Let's start there. Why do we have that REM neurobiology? Well, one theory is called the sentinel theory. And the idea is when we go into sleep, we go into very, very deep sleep. And when an organism is in deep sleep, it's vulnerable to predators. So we need to arouse out of that deep sleep periodically in order to be aware of the environment to protect against predators. And so one evolutionary function of REM sleep is to protect the sleeping state. Okay, fine. Well, like I laid out for you all, the areas of the brain that get tensely activated during REM sleep when we're arousing out of deep sleep are those threat detection centers. So in other words, the brain becomes really, really, really sensitive to any potential signals, surprising signals in the environment or internally. In other words, we're in our most receptive state when we're in REM sleep. And that's why we encounter that's why we encounter these entities, in my view. And if we're encountering those entities, then we're, from the philosophy of personalism, we're in deeper touch with what's really going on out there. Both the seen stuff and the unseen stuff. And REM gives us access to that, to a much wider range of reality than we otherwise could, and thus it confers an evolutionary benefit.
Any follow-up, share, Guy?
No, thanks. Thanks, Patrick. This has been fascinating.
Thank you.
John, you had a question.
I'm curious whether there's been any studies and explorations on people who have engaged in visualization practices, entered into trance states, done shamanic journeying, and the relationship between that and the brain waves that are functioning during dream states. For personal experience, it seems like I can engage with the unconscious contents of my psyche, meet entity-like figures, and do all kinds of other stuff with regards to memory reconsolidation, emotional processing, and crying things out, and just seemingly, interestingly enough, not having any more, unlike, like, it's the sleep paralysis kind of encounters that I've had in the past seems to diminish as a result of doing the more actively engaged trance state practice. I'm curious if there's any studies and explorations on that.
Yeah, good. I think not not specifically. However, there's been really good studies on creativity in visionary states associated with narcolepsy. And we know narcolepsy is a REM intrusion phenomena. And people, when narcoleptics, when they go into these visionary states, they score very, very high on these creativity scales. They score very, very high on imaginative, cognitive scales, and so forth. And in my book that I showed at the end of my talk there, Cognitive Neuroscience, Religious Experience, the second edition of that, I go deep into the literature on shamanism there, and I seem to recall there have been studies on what you call shamanic journeying. I don't think there's been studies on brainwave activity in those individuals, but I would predict theta gamma coupling in those states. There's, as you probably know, there's been studies on people who have been infused with DMT, and people who are on ayahuasca, and basically the biology involved is this 5-HT2A receptor signaling effect. So my prediction would be that's what's occurring in these deeply visionary states. particularly when there's entity encounters in those states. So my direct answer is I don't know of any direct studies yet on that, but it would be very fruitful to do that. And the studies that would inform that set of studies are the ones that come from narcolepsy and yeah.
Can I have a follow-up? Thanks. What's coming up is it would be interesting to have studies on people who claim to be shamans or to claim to have engaged in in whatever. And I saw the video you said like they are able to interact and interface with such entities, um, and to see like what's going on in their brains. I'm curious about what the perception from your experience in academia, what the perceptions are of these shamanoid figures, and how are they, yeah, what are they kind of like, how are they received, how are they thought of in these kinds of realms of studies?
I think the biomedical establishment that I operate in, I think it's there's the whole psychedelic renaissance is opening up minds a bit more about the whole phenomena of shamanism. And certainly in the religious studies scholarship community, there's people are wide open about the phenomena of shamanism. You know, particularly since Eliade's book long ago. I mean, it's a known phenomena. It's now well studied in religious studies communities. There's some really good books on it now. I review several of them in my recent book. And but in the biomedical establishment, it's never talked about. It's not known. It's never studied. If you bring it up at all, it's considered quaint and weird. You know, like it's just not on the agenda at all. But in religious studies, it's well known, it's respected, and it's being intensively studied. And in the psychedelic community, it's well known and it's being respectively studied as well. Because, you know, we now know that in order to avoid those bad trips, you need the lore, you need a guide, a shaman, and you need the lore around the shamanistic religious traditions in order to approach these entities that you encounter in the psychedelic state with the proper respect and distance if you're going to be enriched by the encounter rather than destroyed by it. You know, so the knowledge gained in the shamanistic traditions is invaluable in that respect. And, you know, people in the psychedelic community, I think, are waking up to that.
Awesome. Thanks, John. And it's probably the last question. Kevin, you had a question.
Yes. Hi, Patrick.
Hi, Kevin.
Hi, I'm wondering, my question is it possible for other incarnate beings, i.e. people, to invoke supernatural agents? Was it SA? Supernatural agents to appear within someone else's dreams? For example, a potential lover appearing as a succubus, or maybe corporations making you dream about their products. I'm not sure where the line between like symbols and like the supernatural things are, or even, you know, for benevolent purposes like shamans like appear or guardians appearing in someone's dream.
That's a great question. There's a set of techniques that have been recently developed in the last 5-10 years, known as targeted memory reactivation techniques. In the whole dream studies scientific community, and I and a bunch of colleagues recently wrote a letter of warning about this, precisely for what you just mentioned, because these techniques are really powerful. We can implant images into dreams now and alter dream content with these targeted memory reactivation techniques. And they're the effects, what we call effect sizes, associated with these techniques are large, and they're very powerful. And in the wrong hands, they're going to do bad things. So I and a bunch of colleagues wrote a letter of warning to some public health officials around this, that these techniques are now pretty well developed. There's been what we call meta-analytic studies on them. They're reliable, they're reproducible, and they're very powerful. And they're being used to alter dream contents already. So yes, you can probably do that. You can probably, in fact, they're being used to treat things like PTSD, like implanting images to make the nightmares less distressing, for example. So yeah, the techniques exist for that.
So when you say techniques, are these like, are they kind of like, are the tools like limited to researchers like in a lab where you need to like poke their brain in a kind of a Neuralink way, or is it like something that could be
No, they're
done with
known as
just like symbols and sounds and whatever, or is it something more ethereal?
yeah, they're basically pairing techniques. So you habituate somebody to, so you sit them in front of a computer and you pair an image, say, let's say a image of Jesus, let's say, with this with a certain sound. You do it over and over and over again. So you habituate to that sound to them. Or it could be a smell, or there have been many different pairings, but sound is often used. So every time that person hears sounds, they then self-report, yeah, I just thought of that picture of Jesus, even though no picture of Jesus was presented. Okay, so that's classical conditioning experiments. So you simply do that when they're asleep, and we know when they go into REM, then you put the sound on, and boom, they then have a dream where that picture of Jesus appears. It's that kind of thing. But they're now very highly developed and refined. So it's dangerous.
All right. Thanks, Kevin. We'll gently close here. A lot of rich threads opened up. But Patrick, do you have any parting words or closing shares for us?
No, not really, but thank you for this conversation. I love all those questions, and I'm really glad that somebody is paying attention to the ontological reality of these entity encounters. I think it's really, really important, and keep up the good work.
Thank you, Patrick, for the well wishes while we continue to explore these disincarnate entities. And next week, we got one of the leading occultists, Mark Stavish, coming and talk about egregores, the occult entities that watch over human destiny. So that should be an intriguing session. And then you can check out the rest of the series on the YouTube channel. So that being said, Patrick, everyone, thanks so much for coming to the Stoa today.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.